Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, Rudy. This is Corey Millard calling you.
Hello, Corey Millard.
How are you doing today? Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
Well, I do the best I can. I do the best that I can, and I see that we have a disagreement argument going on, and I will say, Mrs. Millard, that when this thing first started, I got Patrick calling me on the other line. Are you still there?
I am.
Okay. I think it's more important to talk to you than Patrick, but I'll just say that before we get started, you realize that I'm recording. I suspect you're recording. And
I'll be totally honest. I've never recorded a phone call before, but I did install something on my phone to try to record this conversation. My concern is that that I'll speak with you, and that you will pick and choose the things that I speak with you about and broadcast that. So I am trying to record the conversation as well.
No, that's fine. I understand, because you and I have a serious disagreement, and I will say that when this thing first started, I tried. I didn't know about you or Josh, and I think Patrick has the right to proclaim his innocence from prison. And I realized that you guys were leaving comments, so I wanted to offer you guys an opportunity to have your say, and I wanted to be fair and just, and you guys would have an opportunity to say whatever you wanted to say. But where things changed for me was when you called the prison, either you or Josh, or you had somebody do it for plausible deniability, and to have Patrick harassed in his cell by the guards, I considered that stepping over the line. And then also the statement by Josh that it didn't matter to him who pulled the trigger after the man has spent 32 years in prison, I considered incredibly wrong as well. So that to me,
I'm glad you brought. I'm glad that you brought up both of those points, because I'd like to address those both.
Okay.
First of all, when Patrick had a shakedown of his cell, somebody had called the prison. You can choose to believe me or not. I will tell you, we were not the first people to have called the prison. It had never even occurred to me. It was not us. You can choose to believe me. You can choose not to. It wasn't us. But you bet your ass, I've been on the phone with the prison every day since the tone and the conversation of these recordings that you've done with Patrick have escalated to a harassing, direct threats against my family. You bet your ass I have been on the phone with the prison every single day. But it was not us that started that. There are some other people that are calling that were not solicited or asked for by us to make that phone call. You can choose to believe that or not, but that's just the truth.
I'll say this. I believe that there is a paid band of government agents that want to see me in jail, and they will use whatever legal excuse they can in order to shut down this prison ministry and to put me in jail. And so they've learned about you, all right? And I believe that you and them will very likely team up together, whether you have or whether you haven't yet, but they will offer you advice. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they called on your behalf. And if you say you didn't call the prison, but you have after that because you're concerned about the rhetoric heating up, I believe that there's a war going on, right? There's a war going on, and when somebody threatens my freedom, they've already taken my job and my livelihood, that this is a war as far as I'm concerned. And people are taking sides. And that I believe that Patrick has the right to proclaim his innocence, and you guys have decided to call authorities, right? Call the authorities in on the situation and continue to escalate it. I didn't escalate this. And so from my perspective, I'm going to continue to give Patrick a right to proclaim the truth about his situation. And if it upsets you, you're welcome to say whatever you want to say. But I need to say this as well.
Absolutely. That's where we actually have some areas that we agree in fully, Rudy. My family and I, we absolutely are proponents of free speech. If Patrick wants to sit out there and spew his nonsense 24 hours a day about how he's innocent, I have no problem with that. What I do have problems with is him making threats against my family. I've got a big problem with that.
Well, I can understand your position there, but you got to understand from my perspective, I've had this YouTube channel for now going over 10 years, and I live under that situation all the time where people publish my home address. I got people that show up at my home, that actually show up at my front door, And I believe they're not who they say they are. I've got video of the United States Marshals, FBI, and the Secret Service showing up at my front door. And so when you're concerned about threats against your house and your family and your livelihood, I live under those threats all the time. When I go out,
well, again,
right?
We've got something in common then, Rudy, because
Yeah.
I just received a death threat on my phone at my work yesterday regarding this situation. So yeah, we've got a lot in common here. That,
Okay.
I
certainly do not support that. I don't know where that came from, and I've never advocated anybody leave you death threats. So here's the deal. From my perspective, Mrs. Millard, you and I had an opportunity to discuss this in private and it not go like a public brouhaha that it's turned into. But now that it has, you've got people on that are going to be siding with you because they hate me. And there may be some crazy people out there that call you and leave death threats that I would never support anybody doing anything like that. But I have no control over them. So you've got people that you don't control that would love to see me put in jail. And I've got people that I can't control that may be calling you and doing some things. But ultimately, we could have had this conversation and it not go public and just let Patrick say whatever he's going to say, and then you guys not got involved. And I didn't want you guys to be pulled into this. It's not my desire that your life be affected. I don't want you to be put in prison. I don't want you to, have an issue with your life. That wasn't my desire at all.
Well, and if you will recall, when we first discovered that there was this YouTube channel, and Patrick was speaking, and et cetera, I did reach out to you, and I did send you a Facebook message, and I see that your comments in response have been deleted because I believe that either you blocked me or something, but the original message that I sent you still remains on my phone, where I just said, we saw this video, we're interested in hearing what he has to say. Where the communication breakdown is when we started listening to what Patrick had to say and realized that it was all a bunch of complete nonsense, and we disagreed and were pointing out our disagreements. That's when the communication breakdown happened. So don't act like you've offered up this opportunity for for conversation, and that you've been just nothing but pure gentleman.
No, but
that is not the case.
Well, from my perspective, it is. You have referred to me as a coward because you say that I've blocked comments, and you just now indicated that I have deleted your comments. From my perspective, I don't recall deleting any of your comments or your husband's comments.
No, I didn't say that you were deleting my comments. What I can see is that there's comments that have been made. They say that there's 12 comments, but only 6 of them show up. So if
I have a like I said before, I have you can choose to believe this or not believe this as well. You gave me that speech regarding whether you initially called the prison. I actually believe you, but I believe it was probably one of the paid government trolls. But I'm going to make this statement: there are paid people by the government that want to use any excuse they can to put me in prison, and I block them. You know why? Because they publish my home address and they constantly slander the prisoners, and the prisoners have very limited communications. Every time they call me, whether it be Patrick or any other prisoner, there's a usually a $5 fee that has to be paid, and a lot of times they have blocked me from communicating with prisoners altogether, and so they're very limited and restricted in their ability to respond to these government trolls who are constantly slandering them. I had one prisoner where the FBI informant wrote an entire book and the prisoner had to sue him for slander and libel. So I don't give these people, when you see those 12 comments but only 6 are showing up, there are another group of people that I simply don't give a platform to. They have the right to open up their own YouTube channel and put out whatever they want to. And I'll say this, Mrs. Millard, they have. And usually their channels are 10 times more popular than mine because I believe my channel is shadow banned. And so I don't give them a platform to slander my prisoners. They have the right to open up their own YouTube channel. So that's why you see what you see.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. And I will go on record with you saying that you have never deleted any of my comments or my husband's comments, and I appreciate that very much.
Well,
thank you for that.
Well, and I appreciate, and I do want to find common ground. And I like I said, I don't want us to be at odds or at war. And if you have a disagreement with with Patrick, I have tried to encourage that, there be some communication with Agnes, or even write a letter directly to Patrick, and I could withdraw myself, right? But I certainly want to be true to my conscience, and if a man has spent 32 years in prison and wants to proclaim his innocence and put out information from the trial and ballistics information and that he did not pull the trigger, then I want him to be able to say that. Now, if that offends you because you believe a completely different thing about what happened during the murder of Lou Millard, which I got to believe is an incredibly tragic event, then you have the right to say back what you want about that, whether it's on your YouTube channel. I'll let you leave comments because that channel is controlled by me. But I'll just say that, Patrick does have a right to proclaim his innocence from prison. And I would hope that you would not want to silence him or not want to harass him in his prison cell. I believe that he suffered.
I have zero problem with Patrick. If he wants to spew his, and I am sorry, but his conversations make my ears bleed, because 3/4 of the stuff that he says is absolute just garbage nonsense that doesn't even make any sense. And maybe 10% of what he has to say has to do with proclaiming his innocence, and the other 5% is thinly veiled or direct threats against me and my family. So it is difficult to listen to him. I have no problem with him proclaiming his innocence. That is fine. And I'm sorry, I want to switch topics a little bit because I want to make sure that I get to this, because it's a major sticking point for me. It seems that a big point of contention here lately is that there's some sort of an assumption. There's been a jump in conclusions here that Josh believes that Lou did not pull the trigger. First of all, Patrick didn't pull the trigger. First of all, that's not true. What Josh was trying to say, and whether he was clear in what he was saying or not, what he was saying is that even if we followed Pat's line of reasoning and on some crazy level Lou was killed by friendly fire, our stance is that even if Lou was killed by friendly fire, if not for Patrick's and his father's criminal actions, Lou would still be alive. And that is what our point of contention is. First of all, there has been ballistics testing done. Patrick is wrong. Lou was killed by a Tech 9. Okay, and that is the weapon that he had, and that is the weapon that Lou was killed by. And there have been ballistic testings done, and if this information is available to anybody, I am happy to forward it to you. There have been ballistic testing done, and it's proven that he was killed by a Tech 9, which is the gun that Pat and his father had. So, but what we were saying is that even if there was some conspiracy, even if the ballistic testing is bunk, et cetera, what our stance is that if not for Pat and Earl's criminal actions, that shootout wouldn't have happened and he wouldn't be dead. That is what our stance is, not that we believe that he was killed by friendly fire. That's not what we believe.
And I would like to respond to that, but I want to go back to what you said about Patrick's calls from prison are rambling, and you made a comment about a lot of them. I think you used the word incoherent, or it's not relevant, or it's something about a lot of his. So part of the thing that I've learned in a prison ministry, especially with a man who spent 32 years in prison, is he just wants somebody to talk to, right? They sit in these jails year after year, week after week, and so if he calls and he doesn't sound like he's on point, or he's not addressing everything that you want him to address, I give him a little slack, given that he's already spent 32 years in prison, and not only that, he's went through all the hardship of his father dying in prison. But going back to what you said about the fact that it's your position that if it was not for their actions, and that even if his position is true, that it was friendly fire, and that there was some sort of setup. And I think he also said that Lou Millard and John Dick ignored the orders from superiors and went out there anyway with an intention that they were going to be doing something that was not right. I don't know the exact words that Patrick uses, but let's go back to what your position is. You said it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they pulled the trigger or not because they set up the situation. Well, I don't agree with that. You and I just simply have an honest disagreement. You could make the argument that there's a lot of things that Patrick or or his father could have engaged in, but just because the police decide to go out to their home after dark, and the resulting situation is that Lou Millard was killed, if Patrick never intended for Lou Millard to die and did not pull the trigger, then I don't see how you could blame him with murder and expect him to die in prison. I mean,
well, I can, and let me explain to you why. This is a fact of the case that Patrick has not been very forthcoming on, and let me set the stage for you here. So, Earl, who is Patrick's father, was in police custody. He said that he had chest pains or something like that. He was in police custody, and he was taken to Cooley Community Hospital for his chest pains, and he was under arrest at that time. He was in police custody, and he was taken to the hospital. He escaped from the hospital, and his daughter picked him up in the back parking lot. They went on a gun run, collected a bunch of rifles and stuff, and then went to their house for basically a standoff situation. The police were called. There's these things saying that there was a stand-down order because they were waiting for SWAT and all this other stuff. That's a bunch of malarkey as far as I'm concerned, or I have found no evidence to prove that. And they went to go serve a warrant. That is what is. He's acting like they were just sitting in their house, sitting around drinking tea and hanging out, and that the police all of a sudden just, ransacked their house. That is not the case. They had escaped police custody. Well, Patrick hadn't. His dad had. His dad, escaped prison, and he facilitated his escape from police custody, and that's when the shootout happened.
So it's your position that Lou Millard went out there with John Dick, just two officers all by themselves after dark to apprehend an escaped convict Earl Hoffman all by themselves? I mean, usually if you're going to go, apprehend someone who's running from the law and expected to have access to firearms, you are going to plan a SWAT team raid. You're not going to just go with two guys after dark. I mean, that just seems very unlikely to me, the story that you mentioned, that, two police officers are going to go apprehend an escaped convict who has known access to firearms. That more than likely they usually do SWAT team raids with like 15, 20 people. They bust down the door and they come in with all their boots and their shields. So it just would be unlikely, the situation you've described. But I'm not here to argue. It's very likely you know a lot more about this case than me. I will admittedly say that I have got a lot of my information about this case from Patrick, and my intention, whether you believe me or not, was when this thing first became aware that you were interested in commenting on Patrick's story, that you would contact him directly. But in any event, also, so let me just further go down this road about you believing Patrick is responsible. So you're putting forth the case that Earl Hoffman, which was Patrick's father, had access to firearms, was an escaped convict, went to his home. Lou Millard and John Dick went out to apprehend him. And how does that make Patrick responsible if there was a shootout and Lou Millard gets killed? Well,
it's very easy to find him responsible. They threw some flares in the dark so that they could see the officers, and then engaged in a firefight with them. That is pretty easy. When he's sitting there holding a gun and is shooting at officers, and then an officer dies. Pretty easy to.
You say they threw a flare, so it's your. I mean, if it's, let's just give the benefit of the doubt for the sake of conversational discussion that Earl Hoffman is the one who shot Lou Millard. If Earl Hoffman threw a flare in the air and actually is the one who pulled the trigger that killed Lou Millard, I can see that Earl Hoffman has to suffer the consequences of that murder if that indeed is what happened. But to send Earl Hoffman to prison and to die in prison, and his son, it's like there's only one person that could have killed it. It's almost like you believe there's like a connection between Earl and Patrick, that they somehow planned to murder Lou Millard, and they had this conspiracy going on. And even if Patrick Hoffman was there and he was hoping to support his father, if he didn't pull the trigger and aim the gun at Lou Millard, I don't think it's right that he be held accountable to die in prison for the death if he didn't.
Okay, well then let me ask you this, Rudy. Say your wife is waiting in line at the bank, okay, and two people come in and they start shooting bullets all over the place trying to take out everybody in the building, okay, and your wife is killed by one of those bullets. Would you want both of those people that were in the bank shooting up at your wife to go to prison for murder?
I think the I think that's a good point that you made, but the analogy is wrong in my opinion, because two guys entering a bank and shooting everybody in the 4A or whatever it's called, the bank teller place. Two guys entering a bank have conspired to go into the bank and to murder everybody. But in this situation, Patrick, that's where he lived. It's not like he planned to go anywhere, and there's no proof that he was like expecting anything to happen. And when this thing breaks down, the police officers go onto his property. It was his home. How did he know all that? It's not like he went anywhere conspiring to murder Lou Millard. He was just there at his house, and he happened to have a father named Earl Millard who was on the run. And so I think the analogy is wrong, and we can have a disagreement, and that's fine. And I'm not saying that I have a lock on truth, and I am willing to be educated, and I am willing to learn things, but I just don't agree with that analogy. But having said that, I have never wished that anybody call you and give you death threats, and it's not my desire that this thing escalate. But if the thing is that I am in a fight for my freedom, which is ultimately a fight to the death, because I will not give up my freedom because people want to put me in jail. And so when I see that there are forces moving against me, to paint me in a way that's they're going to come and SWAT team my house, I've got to think of that as a threat against my livelihood and my life. And so, but that's not my desire, right? I don't desire that to happen, and I don't desire anything bad to happen to you. But I will have to share with you my honest feelings, and you share with me your honest feelings, and we'll just see how this thing turns out. But it's unfortunate that it's gotten to the point that it has. Is the only thing I would say.
Right. Well, I agree with that, and like I say, what you've chosen to do with your ministry, I feel that you are. I feel that you're being irresponsible in, just basically taking a convicted murderer at his word that he says that he's innocent, and you're just kind of going off of his word without doing any investigation.
No, I have done investigation. I have done a little bit of investigation myself. So to say I have done none. So the point you just made, right? That's a very valid point that most logical, reasonable thinking people will say, she just made a good point. But here's my counterpoint. I have studied our criminal justice system enough to know that I have lost complete faith in our trial systems. And I know that courts and prosecutors and courtrooms can be manipulated. And so when somebody like your husband, he told me he was found guilty, and there was a jury that convicted him, and therefore he must be guilty. I know that can carry weight with you and possibly your husband. But for me, that carries no weight anymore, because I have seen over and over and over again. And you call him a convicted murderer as if that settles the matter. He was convicted by a jury, and the judge found him guilty, and they sent him to prison for life. So that's the end of it. For me, I don't give any weight to our criminal justice system anymore. And so I have a totally different world perspective about putting faith in guilty verdicts, because I've seen over and over and over again, whether it be Ted Stevens, Schaefer Cox, Russell Landers, David Hinkson, I know those trials can be manipulated, and I've just lost all faith. So that's where you and we just see things differently again. And so when you say I'm giving a voice to a convicted murderer, well, in my mind, just because a jury found him guilty doesn't mean that he's guilty.
Well, that's fair enough, and I don't have a problem with a platform for people that feel that they've been in prison falsely. I don't have a problem with them having a platform. What I do have a problem with is using your platform to leverage threats against my family.
Okay.
I've got a big problem with that.
Yep, and I'm gonna say that here's what I can say. Patrick called me while we were talking, believe it or not, and I decided it was more important to talk with you. I will tell Patrick during our next call that it's very important that he don't issue anything that could even be vaguely considered a threat or harassment to the Millard family, and just let that go, and let's not discuss that anymore. And I can certainly relay that message, but Patrick will decide what he wants to say and what he doesn't want to say. Of course, you understand that I don't control what Patrick says, and I've had a policy in this prison ministry for some years that I don't censor men who have been sitting in prison for 30 some odd years. So I don't know whether he'll receive that, but I will say that it's my counsel, as his whatever you want to call it, I give him a platform to speak on the internet, right? So I do agree that I do that. But I'll say it's my counsel that he not mentioned Josh Millard or Corey Millard going forward. Don't say anything about him and just stick to what you consider your facts on the case and to drop it. So if you think that's a good move, I certainly am willing to do that to try to bring some sort of calmness to this situation.
I would appreciate that very much, because I think, unfortunately, that Pat has lost some touch with reality, and he's maybe not understanding the consequences of his actions. I hate to say I feel some sympathy for him, but I do. I think that he is walking on very thin ice. The things that he has said are, any reasonable person would be able to listen to that and be like, this guy is, Josh is listed as the victim of record for this crime, and he's using your platform to threaten the victim of record on a crime, and he's going to get himself into some real big trouble.
There's certainly the potential for that, and you speak truth there. But I will say this: what people fail to see that I think I do have more empathy for is if he is innocent, right? If you believe that there is a possibility that Patrick Hoffman is an innocent man and did not plan and pre-plan the murder of Lou Millard, and that other circumstances happened that caused the death of Lou Millard, then sitting in prison for 32 years, watching your life waste away, wind up being 70 years old, can cause a man, not to act in what we would consider rational, proper methods. And so I give him a lot more slack, but I do agree that I will give him counsel not to mention the name Josh Millard or Corey Millard going forward. He can stick to proclaiming his innocence and the facts about the case, but let's just put aside all of this conversation regarding the son of the murder victim and the daughter-in-law of the murder victim. So I can completely agree with you on that point, but I give him a lot more slack than you do, because I think it's very possible, Corey, and at least this is my opinion, that we did have an innocent man sit in prison 32 years who did not purposely do anything or actions to cause the death of Lou Millard. And so when you see this action that you see as a threat upon your family, I see it as, well, he sat in prison for 32 years. He's very angry. He's very bitter. And that's just my words. He probably wouldn't express himself like that, but I give him a little bit more slack than you would.
Well, that's fair enough. We've found some common ground here, and I appreciate, I can appreciate your position, and I appreciate that you can appreciate mine as well. I think something that you could consider is some advice that you can take it or leave it. That the same way that these prisoners feel that that they may have some thoughts or feelings that may be viewed as hostile considering their situation. You got to consider too that my husband has had a 32-year sentence of not having a father, and whether or not that.
No, I'm sympathetic towards that. In the beginning stages, before this thing escalated, that did weigh on my heart. That Josh has spent the last 32 years without his father, and I knew that had to have some severe emotional trauma on his being, and I wanted to be very sensitive to that. But I can't let. I'm just very protective of the prisoners, especially if I believe they aren't guilty of murder. And so I tried to weigh that as this is going forward. But then I saw the team of devils that I know have been attacking me for several years, possibly teaming up with you and Josh. And then I was very concerned that I'm going to be double teamed yet again. And I don't want my prison ministry to be silenced, but I also don't want him to harass you. You've been very open in having this conversation with me. I have a lot of respect for that. And I'm just going to ask you point blank. You and I, we both recorded it. I've admitted in the beginning that I've recorded it. You've recorded it. If you desire, I will put it out there. I have no preference at all. If you don't desire and you just say, I would like this to be a private conversation between Rudy and me, I will do my best to respect that, assuming we go forward in a civil manner, right? I'm not guaranteeing.
That's fine with me. That's absolutely fine with me.
Okay.
I have no problem if you would post this conversation in its entirety. I have absolutely no problem with that.
Okay, very good. So maybe people will learn from this on how we can get along and deal with each other. I certainly wish you. I don't wish you to be put in prison. I don't wish you to be harassed, and I don't wish for people to call you with death threats. But I would ask that you recognize that I'm also under a lot of attacks, and that that Patrick Hoffman has spent a lot of time suffering for this particular crime, whether he did it or not. 32 years, and so we'll just move forward, and I'll do my best, to act in a godly way. And I recognize and respect the fact that you've called me and you've been very honorable. But I wish that this has happened before it blew up. But it is what it is. So
it is what it is.
Yeah.
I appreciate that as well. I'm sorry, I've got
Okay.
to jump in and say one more thing, and I know that you have no control over this, but this is my plea, this is my ask, and if Patrick is able to hear this, I would appreciate it very much. He's taken a line where he is also trying to slander the character of Lou and also of Josh's mother. The things that he has said about them being drunks and drug addicts and all that sort of thing, those statements are so preposterous that they're laughable. I mean, they really are. I guess he can say whatever he wants. But it's just not true. It's very difficult to listen to somebody just spewing absolute lies. He would be much better served to stick to the facts. If he thinks that there are things on the ballistics report and blah, 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 all this stuff that he can use to prove his innocence, he would be much better suited to stick to those things and stop just saying absolute bald-faced lies. It takes the wind out of his sails for anything else that he's got to say. Anything that he's got to say that could warrant some more investigation or digging into. When he's saying stuff about people's characters that are just flat out wrong, and a million people would testify to that, it takes the wind out of his sails for the rest of his argument. So that's the last thing I wanted to say.
I think that's a very fair statement, and I'll offer this as well. What I would ask for you to, and that's a fair statement, what I would ask for you to understand is that Patrick he's not going to be able to listen to this conversation that you and I had. It's very unlikely that somebody is going to play this whole. So what's not only true with Patrick, but it's also true for many other prisoners. I send them comments, right? Comments are left by people that don't like them. They take different positions than them, blah, blah, blah. And I mail it to them. And then that's all they have is the comment. Patrick's, because his restrictions are so limited, he has to pay for his phone calls. The 20 minutes goes up. I think most phone calls are 50 minutes. Patrick goes usually 20. It's very unlikely he's going to hear this conversation. So, we're not able to communicate with him like we are on the outside in such a free manner. And so I pray that he does, somehow would hear this whole conversation. But I don't know that it will be possible. But we'll have to wait and see. And again, I think we have found some common ground. I don't have anything against you personally. I hope you don't have anything against me personally. And maybe if I have done something to offend you, it wasn't intentional. And I'm glad that we were able to have this discussion. I'll let you have the last word if you have anything you want to say.
I just want to say that I appreciate this. I appreciate the tone of this conversation. I wasn't expecting to be able to have a civil conversation with you. So you've been a gentleman in this conversation. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Well, God bless you, Mrs. Corey Millard, and I will relay the best I can when Patrick calls about our conversation, and at least my counsel. I can't control the man's actions, but I will relay my counsel. And God bless you, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks very much, Rudy. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.